Hey entrepreneurs, this is Galia here from Maharoni Business Law in Oakland, California, wanting to talk to you today about injury and illness prevention plans. Yay! An IIPP, which is the commonly, used term for the long phrase injury and illness prevention plan, is actually something that every employer in California is required to have if you have at least one employee. And yes, that includes employees who work from home. Most people that I work with don't know that they're even supposed to have this. So I wanted to send a video today to educate you, let you know that you need to have one if you have at least one employee, and talk a little bit about what's supposed to be in there and how to make one. Even though these IIPPs are required if you have an employee, it's also something that's really, really important for you to have, first of all, because it's going to minimize the risk of injury to your employees, which is great for the employees, but also protects you, the employer, from lawsuits or from workers' comp claims or from, having to pay for someone getting hurt. And we don't want you to have to do that, and we don't want anyone to get hurt. So basically, an IIPP is a document that lays out all of the rules and requirements and procedures for how to keep your workers safe. It's very important. So it is required, which means if you don't have one and Cal OSHA finds out, they can fine you. And this is one of the most, if not the most common thing that Cal OSHA fines businesses for in the state of California. So one thing you do need to know going into this as well is that once we have this IIPP in place, you are required also to have it available to all your workers, which makes sense. So they know what's in there and they know how to comply. So we know what an IIPP is. We know you probably have to have one, but what should actually be in there? So there are a lot of requirements of what actually has to be in here, but to summarize kind of the 4 groups of things that you need. Number 1, it should include description of who's in charge of this safety plan. So we want to know who's responsible for implementing it and keeping it keeping it going and making sure everything that we're describing in there is happening. So one thing that you need to do, other than all, just obviously identifying who that person is, we need to make sure that that person has the authority to carry out everything that this document says they're supposed to do. Make sure they have the knowledge to do anything they need to do to implement it, and the resources they need. So do they need training? Do they need a budget? Do they need tools or, other resources or support to manage these safety issues appropriately and thoroughly? So number 2, we need information in here about how to act, what the rules are, and how to actually follow them. So we're looking for things that are really focused on compliance. What do we need to do and how do we do it? Communication. So that's, how do we communicate this information to the employees, and how do the employees communicate to us if they see hazards or they're injured? And also a lot of record keeping requirements. So how are we going to keep records of all of the procedures and all of the inspections we're doing and all of the injuries that might happen? So first of all, we want to look into, what are the procedures that we actually need to keep the workers safe. We want to have written descriptions of all of the things that everyone's required to do to keep things safe. And we want these procedures to be practical, and we want them to be achievable. We want them to be things that people are actually going to do, because if they're impossible to do, nobody's going to do them. That also means we want to have a training system in place as well. It needs to be effective training. So what do we need to do to communicate to our employees what they're supposed to be doing to keep themselves safe? And so that means whenever someone is hired on for the first time, or when a person who's already working for you changes jobs within the company, we need to train them. Or if you're making a new IIPP, or you're updating your IIPP or a system, or you have new equipment that you need to train people on, it's up to you to make sure everyone's trained on staying safe. There needs to be a system in there included in this for reporting. So what if something goes wrong? Or what if an employee sees something that nothing has gone wrong yet, but they see that there's a risk here, there's a possible hazard that might happen, and we want to make sure that we take care of that before something even happens and have a procedure for it. And we want this communication to be back and forth, we want the employees to feel comfortable and encouraged to come to you to explain the hazard and ideas they might have about how to fix it. And we want them to be really encouraged to report hazards and report injuries if they come up. Number 3, we need to identify what the main hazards are. So we're going to want stuff in there about how to identify the hazards and ways to correct them. And again, a lot of this is going to involve record keeping and keeping track of everything you're doing to identify and solve the problem. So what are the main things that can injure someone? The hazards at a machine shop are going to be really different from the hazards at a business where everybody's working from home on their computers. And those are also going to be different from a restaurant where people are, using sharp knives and working really quickly. So whatever type of business you have, you need to identify your particular hazards, and you want to identify inspections that you need to do of the workspace to make sure that the hazards are at a minimum. And again, we want input as much as possible from the employees about potential hazards and ways to correct them, because they're the ones on the ground, they're the ones actually doing the work, and they're the ones who are in a much better position, frankly, to identify those things and have good ideas for how to fix them. And again, all throughout this whole process, we're documenting everything as much as possible. So finally, we want to have really detailed procedures in there for if something does go wrong. So we're talking about a really thorough procedure for investigation if an accident happens or some sort of exposure happens. We're going to want procedures in there about reporting all of that in writing and having, again, a really good record keeping system for information that you're getting in that investigation. And we're going to need really good rules in there about how to correct the hazard. And you're going to need to also do it as quickly as possible, depending on the scope of the hazard. The worse the hazard is, the faster you're going to want to fix it, of course. So if something does happen, it's your responsibility to correct it as quickly as possible and learn from it. So it's not just, oh, something went wrong, let's fix it. He had to get stitches, and now everything's fine. No, we want to look into what actually happened and how can we change our system or procedures to prevent this from happening again in the future. And if needed, that might require an update to your IIPP, or at least an update of some sort of system. So those are a lot of the main things that are going to be going in there. And as you can understand now, IIPPs are going to be very different depending on your particular workplace and the work that your employees are doing. So it's very, very important that these are really tailored to you. So that leads me to some of the frequently asked questions we get about IIPPs. So number 1 is, this sounds like a lot of work. Can I just get one of these online somewhere? So my answer is yes and no on that. I do not recommend just Googling it and finding some random IIPP from some random company and just taking it and making it yours. That's not going to work for you. It's not going to be tailored to you. And you don't even know whether it's covering all the requirements that are in there. So I don't recommend doing that. But there are a couple of state websites, like the DIR or Cal OSHA, that have templates that are tailored already to include most of the requirements. And there's also a state fund has a builder that might help as well. My hesitation is, again, the most important thing is that this is tailored to you and your business and your employees. So even if you're taking one of these kind of state created templates, I really still encourage you to either bring it to a lawyer or at least, bring it to an expert, or do a lot of reading and make sure that this thing is actually tailored to your company and the needs of your company. Because if it doesn't, it's not going to help you, it's not going to help your employees, and it's not going to comply with their requirements. Okay. So the next question we've been getting more of lately is, do I still need one of these if all my employees work from home? The answer is yes. And so it feels kind of silly, because, what procedures are in place for me to minimize hazards to my employees when I don't have any control over their workspace. So, you're still required to have one, and you're still required to minimize hazards to your employees as much as possible. So the answer is yes, but Again, it's just going to be really tailored to you and your employees. And we want to make sure that, you're going to have stuff in there about ergonomics and requirements that they keep a safe, clean workspace, things like that. And it's up to you to do any sort of even remote inspections that you need to do, or make sure they're educated enough to know what the requirements of their workspace are, because you still can get sued for injuries they sustain at home. And finally, we're getting a lot of questions about COVID-related safety. So there is a new rule, actually, that requires most employees to have a COVID-19 prevention program. So this is basically an IIPP, but specific to COVID-19 safety. So there are its own rules about this. It's mostly about preventing infection, again, providing training, conducting hazard assessments related to COVID-19. So COVID-19 prevention program is required for most, but there are some exceptions for companies whose employees are only working from home, there's only one employee and they don't interact with anybody at work. So contact an expert to figure out if you need one, but the safe assumption is that you do, okay? So I'm not going to go into the details of this because it's its own thing, but generally it looks very similar to an IIPP, with all the rules about record keeping and training and hazard assessment, all that, but also addresses things like face coverings and PPE, and when an employee is symptomatic, or if you have an outbreak at work, all those things are covered. So make sure to look into that. You're probably required to have one of those as well, okay? So finally, best practice on this is you want to make sure you're reviewing your IIPP at least once a year, okay? Because your business changes, your procedures change, your employees change, your processes change, your equipment changes. Look at it at least once a year, update it as needed, because again, it's really important. It's tailored to what you actually do. And finally, it's your responsibility to make sure your employees understand what's in there, they know what to do, and they have access to this IIPP. Okay, so if you have any questions about IIPPs, our office is happy to answer them. Please feel free to reach out whenever you'd like. Always happy to help. But the main thing I want you to know is that you are required probably to have one of these in the state of California, and I don't want you to get in trouble for not having one. And when you have one, make sure it's tailored to you and your company. So please let us know again if we can help answer questions, or if you need help drafting one of these. We also love doing these educational videos, so if you want to be informed of when we have more of these up, please feel free to follow us on our social media, sign up for our newsletter, like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, and we're always here to help support you and your business. So looking forward to talking with you more soon. Have a good one.